So this is a piece I did recently, an aspen painting. It's a 30 by 40 inch. That's why the sides are a little bit fish-eyed. It's hard to get that fit in there and still not have me covering up the painting every time I put a stroke on there, so a little complicated. But anyway, the image right here, this is the beginning wash-in stage. And some people paint that way. They'll leave it just like that. They'll do a big wash. It's got that initial splash. I mean, when my family came walking through here and saw the painting, their first comment was, "Ooh, I like that." You know, the colors were rich. It had the contrast with those bright, stark tree trunks and all of that. So there are so many different ways of painting. That is one of those ways. We can go for a real initial, boom, I like that kind of reaction, and then stop at that point. I mean, I've got a lot of little things going on in here with all these tree branches and all the little twigs and things that are going in here. I've got some good movement, and I have down in the bottom areas down in here, I've got variety of direction of the strokes and some different contrast. So there are a lot of redeeming qualities in the initial wash. And that's what I want. When I start, I want that initial reaction for me to be, all right, I think I'm on the right track with this. That doesn't mean that it's going to end up anywhere near what I've started with. But that's initially, I want those abstract qualities to really sing to me, to resonate with me. So then I start to add in and play with colors, and getting some lavenders. I've got all those warm oranges. I'm going to use some lavenders on top of that because that was my initial thought, was the kind of a cool, misty almost setting for these aspen trees where it's early morning, late evening. I'm not really too concerned about the time of day necessarily. And for me, I'm really wanting more of an overcast. At this point, I could do a very bright, sunny, strong contrast of shadows and light. But as I progress, I decide that I want more of an overcast day. And that really was my initial thought. But at this point, I could change that idea and go in whatever direction that I want with it. So when I'm talking about what I call the final 10%, keep in mind that does not mean that all of those 10%ers come at the final 10% of the painting. Sometimes I'm getting some of those 10%ers in at the very beginning and throughout the process of the painting. But when I'm talking about those final 10%, I'm talking about those little color shifts, those branches, those strokes, the contrasts of light and value, the complementary colors placed adjacent to one another. All of those little things are the final 10%. Those subtleties, those nuances that take a painting from, yeah, it's a good painting, maybe a little bland, I've seen it before, to there's something about that really sizzles, something that is electric, something to really grab the viewer and keep pulling him back over and over and over again for years to come, not just for an initial, hey, that's a nice painting kind of reaction. So some of those that I'm talking about would be like this little branch right here, little sparks like that, a branch maybe like that brightness that's in there. I might end up leaving something like that, or if I put some more opaque paint into it, keeping it around that same value, possibly. So I'm paying attention to those little things that I had in the very beginning that I might want to keep showing in the final iteration of the painting. All right, so right here, I know that I'm not finished. But when do I really know that I am finished? When are those final 10% going to work? Okay, so I start to add in more. I start getting some contrast, light and dark areas going on in here with those deer bites and other things that happen to aspen trees. I'm starting to play a lot more with shadow and light value patterns, creating structure and movement with the aspens and throughout the painting. And I'm playing with things right now, like with a bit of shadow from a bush, or even over in this area, a rock, playing with different colors of shadows and different shapes, just really getting the overall pattern established in my painting. So then I start to put in a lot more grasses, obviously, and some rocks. I'm starting to create a movement, the direction I want the viewer to kind of move through the painting into it. But at the same time, I realize that this is almost the way that I've brought the green up in here. I've almost basically cut the painting in half. And that's generally not a real exciting composition or structure for a painting. So I'm cognizant of that at this point, but I'm still kind of deciding what I want to do with that. How far do I want to take the green? Do I want to bring the purples down farther? Are there other things that I can add to this that will help break up the fact that I've almost cut that in half? So what are some of the things that I can do? And at the same time, I'm starting to add in more things like this dark branch over here and some other trees in here that aren't necessarily aspen trees. Then as I move it along, I decide that in this other version here, I have all this green and it's just not working for me. In fact, that's how I'm going to pull some of these purples down in here, is by pulling in some rocks. Rather than just increasing or pulling this kind of stuff down over these greens, because I'm actually liking the motion, the movement of this kind of S pattern that I've got here. So how can I pull these lavenders and other colors down into these greens and break this up so it's not so boring? Well, that was through pulling in and bringing rocks in here. So I can get a lot of those lavenders and other colors similar to what I have back in here, down in here with some rocks. Now I've got to make sure that at the same time that I do that I don't have objects down here that are going to be so interesting that nobody wants to come up here and see the aspen trees. Because that really is this overall subject of my painting, is the aspen grove. But I also want to make sure that the rocks aren't boring. So I was listening to a fellow, actually I was reading his book, and he was saying that you can't have rocks like this area here, that the great paintings won't have things off on the edges or the sides that are very detailed overall, because they'll pull the attention down in there. I don't agree with that. I don't like rules like that. I don't like constraints or boundaries in my paintings. So what I have to do is, if I do put something like these rocks down in here, especially this area right here, where I've got really strong contrast of light and dark, and a lot of interest going on in that area, I have to make sure that I pull enough interest up into these other areas that the viewer doesn't get stuck down there. But that doesn't mean that I can't have something down in there that has a lot of interest to it. There's another aspect to all this, is how much do I put up here? I could leave it as just stark trees, because the winter is coming, the trees have lost their leaves. There's nothing to say how much I have to put anywhere. I'm figuring that out as I go. And that's really why, when we're talking about getting into top galleries, really pushing our careers forward, formula painting is never going to cut it. That's never what we're about. We don't want formulas or trite equations that are going to work for us every time. It never works that way. Painting is tough, it's difficult, and it always will be. It doesn't matter how long you've been painting, it's always difficult. Because at each level that we get to, there's another level to go to, or there's something more that we see in it that we think, I'm almost there. But I think I have on the periphery of my thinking here something more. I don't know what it is, but I think I can get there. So that's the root of being an artist, is that constant expansion of skill and understanding and pushing it farther and farther. So I'm starting to like a lot of the things that I have. I've got these little ghost trees back in here and other types of foliage, and I'm starting to get some little leaves and accent areas going, little bits of grass. So these little bits of grass, that's often what I'm talking about when I also say the final 10%. So the final 10% are those strokes that finish off an area. That's why it doesn't have to be at the last bit of the painting that those final strokes are put in there. Sometimes it's all the way through. So I might come, and with a rock area like this, when I first put it in there, I might put in the final refining strokes, and it's done. So like this little edge right there, I would consider that a final 10%er. It's the stroke that makes that rock come alive. It gives it structure and interest. It gives it that contrast. It might just be a bit of color. It might not be value contrast. It might be color contrast, like a bright red highlight on a green leaf, that sort of thing. So those are the final 10%. And we have to kind of determine that often as we go. It's not something we can always figure out right before we start a painting. Often it's the things that we figure out as we get there. So at this point in my painting, I thought, well, you know what? I might be about done. Maybe this is good enough. Oh, that's a terrible phrase. Don't ever let that phrase sink into your psyche. Get that phrase out of there. The idea of good enough. There are times where we have to come to the point where we say, it's finished. It's done. I don't know what else I could do to it that would make it stronger. And if I do anything, I'll probably just make it weaker. So that's a good point to stop. But getting to a point where maybe we're a little bit timid, we like a lot of what's going on in there. We don't want to damage or we don't want to destroy what we've accomplished. That's fear. And that's never a good thing. That fear is what stops most artists from progressing to the next level. I got to this point and I have the ghost trees back in here. I've got a lot of detail and movement and motion. I've got some of those little final 10%ers going on through here. I've got some foliage. It's nice and subtle and nice. And then Christy came in and said, nah, that's boring. And I said, what? What? So I knew then that I wasn't at my final stage. Okay, so did that make any difference to you? Going from that to that? Which one do you like better? And see, those are subjective judgments. And that really comes down to us as individual and unique artists. Sure, Christy can come in and say, that's boring. But I can ignore her. I'm the artist. I might have a certain something that I'm going for that she doesn't see yet. But maybe she does. Maybe she does see something that I'm not seeing because I'm so close to it. I've been so involved in it that I've lost perspective. Now I've got my mirrors behind me. I can step back a good 20 feet here in my studio and look at my painting. And I do that constantly. I'll go off 20 feet from my painting, look at it, get an overall impression of what's going on, and decide whether I'm there or not. Does it have that spark? So when she said it was timid and boring, I thought, you know what? I already knew that. I was convincing myself that I'm going for subtlety like T. Allen Lawson, and it's good enough. Oh, that was terrible. So I got rid of that phrase, it's good enough. I got rid of the fear of losing what I already had and thought, nope, I'm going for the gusto. I'm going for the grand prize in this competition. And there's no actual competition. It's a competition with myself. But we should always be kind of in competition with ourselves, always pushing ourselves even more. So I start adding in, as you can see, the little sparkles. And it's not just sparkles, but it's also darks, little dark leaves. And then when I start adding in those dark leaves, I'm also adding in groupings of leaves and structure. So like a smaller tree, they'll have more thick groupings of leaves down lower than a bigger tree. So that's why I'm not putting these leaves all the way, not taking this part and putting it over across this part of this tree necessarily. Because this bigger tree, the leaves, the thicker, more grouped leaves like that might be up higher. And that's also variety. We want to get that variety. So when I start adding in all these little sparkles and delights that I enjoy in here, I don't want them everywhere and carpets of it. These are special accents, and I need to treat them as if they're crowning jewels. You know, you don't take a king's crown and just cover the whole thing with rubies. Then you don't notice any of the rubies. You put them in very specific areas to draw attention and to draw attention to the fact that this is a gem. This is something rare and valuable. And that's kind of the way I think about my accents and the darks and the light accents. That these are rare and precious, and I need to make sure that I put them in just the right spots, not everywhere. Okay, so then I keep really refining little bits more as I go because I'm just not quite satisfied all the time. So some of the, let's see, let me go back here. So I'm taking some of these trees, like this one right here. You'll notice in the next one, see, I'm starting to add more in. I'm getting more structure to some of those trees in the background as well, and bringing in more aspen trees, like right here also. Bringing in a few more here and there. Okay, so you can see this branch right here on this tree. So I'm also starting to create that overlap of elements, so that one tree, because Christy, when she came in, she would say that a tree that seemed to be wanting to come forward wasn't necessarily coming forward. And I wasn't seeing that at the time when I was painting. Still too involved in the painting. So it's good to have that second eye, have somebody come in that you trust is going to tell you the truth. So I started to increase the contrast of some of the trees that I really wanted to pull forward and have more attention on, while still fleshing out some other trees that are in the background, giving them a little bit less of a ghost to them and a little bit more solidity, without pulling them right directly up in with the rest of the trees. So these trees, I want to have a lot more, the darks are going to be darker, the lights are going to be lighter compared to the trees that are in the background. I can have little subtle bits, but if you take like, let's say this part right here. In fact, I'll do that right now. If I take and I grab that, so I'll grab that color right there, and then I'll come over maybe and let me paste that in so I can move it. Okay, so just so you can see what kind of a highlight that is in comparison. Let's see, where's a bright one? Right here, in this bright highlight. And I get rid of the selection so you can see it. All right. Okay, so you can see that's a lot darker. Even though that looks like a highlight over here, it's dark compared to the highlight that I had right there that I covered up. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about values. It looks bright relative to the things around it, but in comparison with the brights that I have up here, it's definitely a much darker value and a much more grayed tone than what I have up front as well. Okay, so then that still wasn't good enough, so I keep going with it until I get to the final stage of the painting. So I've kept, from the initial stages, I've kept a lot of those lavenders and oranges that I had in the very beginning, going all the way through in the background there. And even down into some of the areas down in the oranges, down in these areas, little spots that poke through here and there. And sometimes if I cover up, like some of this might have been some of that background orange, but a lot of that was actually orange that I came back in with and dry brushed into some of those spots because I wanted more of that vibrancy that's created by the juxtaposition of the cooler lavenders and the warmer oranges that I had in that initial background wash in. I'll actually come in and put those in there, dry brush them back in there. So as you can see, I still have little bits of blue sky and other things poking through because I want those blues and lavenders to go throughout the painting. And I don't think that, to me, I don't get stuck down in here with these rocks in the bottom corner, but they're interesting enough that they start the conversation. And then the curve of this can pull the viewer right up and through into the painting. And then I have branches that move the eye through here. So when we go back thinking about early, okay, so here's an early stage and then the final stage. And that's a little bit hard to tell. Let me get to this one. Okay, so going from the early to the final. There's a little bit earlier when I thought I might have been done, and then the final. You can see that the changes are not dramatic. They're pretty subtle, but they can make a huge difference. Just like this area right in here, just that small little branch and these little bits of leaf and thin branch structure in there can really help to give some dimension and interest to this area. So all the way through the painting, even back in the background, I'm trying to break things up, give variety to it, and create something that little shifts and shifts of color and value all the way through it that are going to interest the viewer, that hopefully will be things that aren't noticed at the first glance at the painting. But over time, over coming back to it over and over again, those things start to come forward. They start to stand out. Okay, so let's look at another painting and see some of the changes. I'll try to go through some of these quickly as well. Okay, so here's another piece. This is called Breakfast is Ready. And when I first did this, sorry, the photo's a little bit bad. My studio, when this is during my master's, my studio didn't always have the best lighting for photography in there. I should have taken it outside. But anyway, this is a 24 by 36 inch painting. And there was a house there in town that I just loved. It was in a rural setting. I mean, we're right in town, not rural, sorry, urban, whatever that is. It was in a neighborhood, but it had a lot of fun plants around it, some rock walls and things. And I loved that house. So I painted the house and wanted to have that in a nicer setting than with other houses around it. So I created this scene, and initially I liked it. I thought, there's a lot of stuff in here that I enjoy. It was kind of like what I'd want to see for a vacation spot. But then over time I realized that a lot of this, let's see, let me get this right here, these little spots, they are disorganized. They're just kind of lumps of stuff, all kind of disjointed. Where's the viewer supposed to look? What's my point here? The building over here was the high contrast area. So this is what, really, there's nothing in here that's leading the viewer anywhere. The water doesn't really lead. It's just kind of on the edges of the painting. The trees, there's a hill over here, but what is there really for people to look at? What's the point to it? So I've got this really high contrast of shadow and light in the house back here. But what else is there? I mean, all of this just seemed kind of not very well thought out. So eventually I changed that to this. And sorry, that is a pretty bright image. Sorry about that. Especially after seeing that other one that was so dismal looking. So this is what the final iteration of that painting was. And really what brought this painting to life were the little things, the little leaves that are in here. So like all the little sparkle leaves right here that help push this tree I put in here to help push that house backward a little bit. It's these little bits of leaves right here all throughout that give everything that liveliness, that help create the sense of motion and movement that we get when we're outside. So when we go out on location, there's so much going on. It's not just what's there in front of us. So that's why taking a photograph, you're not hearing the birds, you're not feeling the wind, the breeze, you're not hearing the rustling of insects and birds and whatever else might be out there. There are so many things that are creating the dynamic environment that attracts us to that scene. And when we take a photograph, that all disappears. It's not there. All we see is this static image that doesn't really have the life that we felt when we were out there. And that's what we have the opportunity of doing as artists, is bringing back in some of that life, whether it's through certain colors or through contrasts, whatever it might be. We have to bring that life back into it that the photograph lost. That's why photography just doesn't cut it when it comes to trying to create paintings from photographs. If that's all we do is create these paintings from these photographs, then our paintings are going to look like photographs, and they're not going to have the life that we want to have in our paintings. So now you see that this hill back here, the motion helps bring the viewer back in there towards my basic center of attention, the building back here. But it does it in a much more subtle way, and it feels natural back there rather than just feeling like a hill. This actually has some purpose to it. And everything now leads me back to the building. But I have enough energy involved in the branches, in the leaves. These things have a purpose right here. The plants that are by the water, they feel like they're supposed to be by water. So all of those things have enough energy in them that they help bring the viewer's attention to these areas. So we're not just stuck over here on the building, hopefully. There's enough that the viewer can then come back out away from the building and enjoy the other things that are here to enjoy. So that's what I'm talking about with these final 10%. There's a lot that goes into that. We've got to make sure that we've got the viewer's attention captured in a way that they're going to want to go through the whole painting and feel that movement, that life that is there, and still have, if we have a center of attention, there doesn't have to be a focal point. There doesn't. You'll hear that from people. I was at a plein air art show where the judge told me that, because I had 3 different buildings in there, she said, well, you don't have a center of attention. And I said, you don't have to have a center of attention. There doesn't have to be a central focal point in a painting. That's one way of creating a composition. That's an easy formula. It's an easy thought to help a student that's beginning to create a painting. But as an extreme example, a Jackson Pollock painting does not have a center of interest. It's an overall feeling of energy that's in the painting. That's the important part of it, not a center of interest. So in our paintings, even with representational art, we don't have to have a center of interest, like the building back here. We can have many centers of interest. The reason why I put these blossoms on here, and you notice I have blue in the shadows and the brighter yellowish tones on the outside of that to create the sense of light and light filtering down through the semi-overcast day. One of those really light, hazy days. And then I take that and I move it over here as well. And then I have this color down here and I move it back here as well. And it ties in with the building that's back here. I'll have purple over in here. And then I try to pull those purples into other places in the painting as well, and back into the background. For me, I have a lot of centers of interest, but hopefully none of them are demanding so much attention that the viewer can't move around to other centers of interest. And that's often how I paint. I don't want a center of interest. I like a lot of different spots that the viewer can go to. And in this case, I do have a major, this is the primary center of interest with a lot of other minor centers of interest throughout the painting. Okay, next. All right, so this was, if you remember, the final attempt at this scene on location there at McCullough Park. I really liked this tree that was here in the front, the way the light was hitting on it, and I was trying to get a little sense of that, the shadow and light pattern, some of the leaves and the colors. And then I also, if you'll remember, talked about how off in the distance it really grayed down and blued out, and I just didn't have enough time to capture that day. So now I'm coming in here to the studio with my painting, and I'm not using photographs for this. I'm not using my photo references. I'm just continuing with my memory and my imagination to finish this off. So there's what we end up with in the painting. Now I start to add in what I've talked about before. I don't know yet where I want to take it necessarily, so I'm going to play and experiment a little bit with it. So I start adding in some of those little... Remember when I talked about off to the side, if you remember the video from the course, when I talked about off to the side, quite a ways from me, near some other trees, were all those fall leaves that had fallen onto the ground. I didn't have any in front of me at the time, but I saw them when I came into the area. And I thought, if I want, I can pull those in. So I start to pull in, even though these trees weren't necessarily rife with fall foliage, I wanted to start pulling some of that into here and give it some color. So I start adding in these little areas, some of these little areas here with the yellow orangish leaves in there. Then I decided, I liked the strong shadow pattern back here with this big area and how it came down through the painting, but it was interfering, it was competing with the dark areas in the trees, in the foliage in the trees. Now it could create a nice foil, a background for the bright highlight leaves that I wanted to put in here and help to pop those forward. But I decided instead of that, I wanted to create the feeling of distance, to really push the viewer back into the park. To do that, I was going to employ some blues and lavenders and gray down that background. Really help it to feel like it's a ways from us and that it's a nice atmospheric day. So that's what I'm starting to bring in here now. So I laid in some lavenders and some blues, and then I come back in with those greens and more bluish greens than what we had with the darker, more olive tone. Those greens, to create that dark green, I had some ultramarine blue, maybe some sap green, and then some transparent oxide red in there, some brownish. I never remember the name of it now that I use transparent oxide so often. Burnt sienna. what would be burnt sienna mixed in there. So it's kind of a warmish green. Well, now I'm going to really cool those greens down, make them more on the blue side rather than on the reddish side, or brown side, I should say. So I start adding in all these things, and then I'm going to increase the feeling of, because out in that park, it's a rolling hill area. Here in Muncie, you don't get much of that. So when I see those hills, I really want to employ those. I want to use those for the variety and for the interest. I start to get more of a feeling of rolling hills in here, bringing in some other things as well, like this tree. I'm going to start pulling in more little trees throughout here and playing with things. So same thing with the trunks back here. Now these trees, because they're off in the distance, I'm going to gray those down. The values are going to be dimmer and the colors are going to be less saturated. So I'm pushing those off into the background. Then I start adding in some of my 10%ers. These 10%ers all through here. Just little things. And part of the reason why I'm putting those in the early stages, because I know I've got a ways to go, and I'll probably end up covering up a lot of that just with the changes that I make. The reason I do that is to give myself a sense of, is this the right direction to go? Do I want to have this kind of detail? Do I want to have it more simplified? So I'm kind of giving myself an idea of how much refinement, how much detail I want to actually put into this. So I start adding in all these little leaves and branches, breaking up the big solid structure that I had back there and making it much more leafy. Holes in there, sky holes, and little areas where the light is coming through. And I'm also still refining to a greater degree the grays, the blues and things, and the lavenders back into the background. So I pulled in a whole lot more of the final 10%ers in here. I liked what I had initially, so I pull in quite a bit more and get a lot of that all through here. In these areas, all through this, I'm trying to break up also this big shadow shape right there. So experimenting, playing around, bringing in more color, like this orange branch right in this area right here, pulling in more color and variety into that, giving you that sense of movement and life that's out there. All right, so now I've taken that, I decided once I put in those final 10%ers that the overall shape of those shadows was way too strong. It was drawing attention and pulling away from where I want the viewer's attention to be focused more, and that's in here, into the foliage of those trees, while still maintaining enough interest down in the other areas that the viewer can go in there and have fun with it. But really, this is where the joy of my painting really is. All those little bits of leaf and stuff, that's what I have fun with, those little branches and stuff. Actually, the whole thing's fun, but that's what I love that in a painting. Then you'll notice that I decided that it wasn't working. Nope. That tree, as much as I loved it, and Christy said she would come in and she'd say, I don't know, something's just not working right. And I finally figured out it was that tree. So what we've got here is we have 2 dark trees and we have 2 light trees. And that's not a good pattern. So I realize that in this, I now have a line of trees that are kind of going straight across the horizon of the picture. And I often caution against that. But I'm going to do some things to try to break up so that it's not just a straight line as if I can. But overall, I like the pattern of that. And sometimes we can have a line of trees drawing us across the picture like this, with this one, these, this, all being in a line, basically with the trunks of the trees almost being the same height or the same distance in the painting. Sometimes that can work, but it depends on what else we have going on in the painting. And that's part of the reason why I pulled in this tree over here, was to help offset that a bit. And I'm going to do the same thing. If you notice, I have this tree and this tree back here that are basically about the same, and they're drawing too much as well. So now pulling this out of here, this tree out of here, is going to make that more apparent. And that was a tough decision because I had, if you notice, all these little things, these little subtleties and nuances that I put into that tree, because that really was one of my main focal points before. That's what I'm talking about when I talk about we cannot let fear dictate what we do in a painting. If it's right for the painting, then it's just right, and we've got to do it. So taking that to me, I felt that taking that out was the right thing to do. No matter how painful pulling that Band-Aid off was, it was the right thing to do. All right, so now I've basically gotten rid of that. And now the painting, it opens it up. It allows me to go back into this area that you'll see here in just a second. It allows me to go back into this area where I couldn't before. That tree was blocking it. I didn't have as much sense of openness and an airy, bright, sunny, I want to go wandering through everywhere kind of feeling. So now that tree's gone, I can do that. And so in order to facilitate that, I then tone that tree down. I've used lavenders and grayed it down. I've softened the values, lightened those values, and really pushed that tree back in there. I didn't push it all the way back to the same level or horizon as these trees are, because I want to bring attention to the fact that this is a slope, and this is a hill back here, and it's a different plane. So I've got my plane here, I've got the plane back here, and I've got this other area back there. And that helps then to create even a greater sense of depth in my painting. So those are things to keep in mind when we're constructing our paintings, our compositions, our structure, is how much depth do we want to have? Where do we want the viewer to go? How far do we want to wander with it? Sometimes we can have more of an intimate where everything's close up, it's all confined to a more shallow space. And other times we want to really push our atmosphere and our distance in a painting. And in this instance, I wanted to push that distance. This is also going to help me now focus and really bring in more of these little 10%ers right here. Okay, so this is the final version of that painting. A little bit better lighting on there. As you can see, I've got the lavenders and blues back in there to help push the viewer back. And I didn't take this bright value all the way across the painting. I have this area here that still has a darker value to it. And that helps to bring these trees forward. It really helps to pop those forward. And the bright on here helps these trees to pop forward. Not that they really needed any help because they're already so dark. But another reason for this is also its variety. And you notice I didn't take this dark right here and make it halfway, because this tree basically is cutting this painting at the halfway point here. See? But I didn't want the dark and this light here and the dark here to be half and half. I wanted it's that idea of thirds. So it's not exactly thirds, but it's the same kind of concept. I don't want symmetry in my painting like that. And I think about that kind of concept in every part of the painting as well. I'm trying to break up symmetry. So if you notice, like if I bring down a line here, you'll see that these trunks are not actually all in a line with each other. I've pushed this one up higher, and I've got some other plants in here to break that up even more. And then with each of these, I left this one a little bit more apparent, the base of that trunk, and let me get rid of that. And I've covered this one up a little bit more with leaves and other plant material down in here. And these shadows right here, I tone those down. They're not nearly as dark. And I have a lot of little bits of grass all the way through there. These are the little 10%ers that really bring life to the painting. These leaves up here, like this leaf right there, I don't want that kind of thick, opaque leaf structure everywhere throughout here. But in a spot here and there, like here, although I don't want to create a pattern either. Down in here, the orange spark down here, a green, bright green one over in this direction. And then I'll place those in different spots around the painting to help tie all of those together and still help the viewer to move around the painting. Now, how successful that is or not, that's really kind of a subjective thing. Every artist has something different that they want to bring out in a painting. And so that's why when I was showing my college days, all of that sort of thing, really what it comes down to is it's about experimentation. And by experimentation, we're experimenting to find out what it is that we really like, what resonates with us, what is it about a particular scene or a painting or an artist that we just think, wow, I really like that. I like what that artist does. I want to do that. And then we have to think, well, why do I want to do that? Do I want to do exactly what they're doing? Because then I'll just be copying. And so someone like Scott Christensen, great artist, had a very distinct style. He's taught so many workshops, and his style is, he breaks it down so well in a way that people can understand during his workshops and his trainings, that there are a lot of people who are copying what he does. And you can look out there and find Scott Christensen lookalikes all over the place. And to a great degree, unfortunately, it has kind of cut into his market a bit with his collectors, because they think, I like Scott's style, but boy, this artist over here, I can get it for a lot less money. Now, that's obviously Scott is the originator, and his work is generally much better than those other artists. So when they do pay less for those paintings, they're usually not getting as high a quality out of it. But the problem there isn't that it's cutting into his market, is that these other artists aren't really reaching their potential. They're doing what Scott does as an artist, not what they need to be doing as artists. They're trying to create a nice picture. They're not exploring what it means for them to be an artist. When I'm teaching these principles, I'm trying to teach principles and not formulas, because first of all, there are no formulas. I don't have a formula. If I did, I'd be a lot faster and things would be a lot easier. I want you to discover what it is about you that is going to make your painting sing. Take from what I'm saying right here, see the little things that really appeal to you, try those in your paintings, see how they work with what you're doing, and then expand on that. Take it in other directions. Take your experiences, all that stuff that I showed you with my student career. That was all about trying things and not being afraid. Just take a certain medium like pastel or gouache or pen and ink or whatever and try it out. See what about that medium works well. What do I like about it? And then go beyond that, push it, add color to it, do something to it, add texture, whatever. Try something a little bit different. Try something new. If you're working on a painting, you think, wow, there's some really fun things in here, but it's just not there. Then ruin it. Push it so hard that you ruin it if you have to. If that's what it takes, be willing. Say in your mind, you know what? I'm going to go for it. I might ruin it. I might lose everything that I thought was good about it, but who cares? I can do another one and just go for it. That's what's going to take you to that final 10% in your own work, whatever that means for your own work. You're going to find that final 10% that makes your painting sing. And that's what's going to make the galleries want your work. Not because they suddenly think, oh, I can sell that, but because they won't be able to resist it. And that's the goal, isn't it? It's not, hey, I need to make a painting that I can sell. Who cares? I mean, okay, yeah, we care. It's always nice when somebody wants to buy our work. But that's not the point to it. We didn't become artists. I didn't become an artist when I was in high school thinking, you know what could I do in life that would really make me some money? That was not the thought. So why should it be the thought now? Yes, life presses in upon us and we have obligations and everything else. But if that becomes the motivating factor in what we do, we are never going to find that 10%. We're never going to find that 10% that makes us unique, that takes us out of the realm of where everybody else might be. There are so many lookalikes, so many people that are doing the same thing over and over again. It gets boring. It might be a nice picture, and I want to say, yeah, that's a nice picture. Good job. But why don't you do something that is uniquely you? Don't do what everyone else is doing. Do something that is uniquely you as much as you can. Draw from everyone else. Draw from the best that you can draw from. And then experiment and play until it is you. And when somebody looks at it, they say, you know what? I know who that is. And wow, that is really good. I wish I could do that. Have fun with it. Have a great time doing this. And happy painting.